Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 97. And this episode, we are talking about a genre of games that has come and gone and risen again and is in all sorts of places. Point-and-click adventure games. And to facilitate that, we are joined by Josh Silverman. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. This is pretty much is it still, I guess technically still my favorite genre of gaming, so.
Yeah, I've known Josh since PAX East. We became friends then, which still doesn't feel like it was the same year that we were currently speaking in, and yet
that can't be right.
I know, we've only known each other for like 8 months, Josh. But we became friends at PAX East through, of course, the miracle of Mass Effect, and then it grew from there. Mm-hmm. And very recently, Josh, as of when we're recording, tweeted, "Please bring me on your podcast to talk about point-and-click adventure games. They're putting out a remaster of Sam & Max. I want to talk about it." And so you ask and I facilitate. And I think it's really exciting that these games have come and gone, and then they're getting this resurgence, especially in this weird generation of gaming where consoles are trying to be more like PC. Some PC interfaces are trying to be more like consoles. Like they're trying to bridge the gap between types of games. But I thought a fun place to start with the conversation is to talk about the first point-and-click adventure game we ever played, because I have to bring to the table, Geoff, I was wrong. The Strong Bad games were not the first point-and-click adventure games I ever played.
Okay.
I forgot about this until Some Call Me Johnny did an episode on this game very recently and wanted to throw his TV out the window. But the first point-and-click adventure game I ever played was Pac-Man 2, The New Adventures on the Sega Genesis.
Holy shit.
Do you guys remember this game?
I didn't play it, but I vaguely remember of its existence.
I know it exists. I've seen like a speed run of it or something, because yeah, it's a piece of work.
So it is one of the it's a console point-and-click adventure game on the Sega Genesis. As far as I know, that's what it was designed for. It had a release on other consoles as well, I think, at the time. It is the clunkiest, dumbest, most ridiculous game. And yet, as a kid with Game Genie, I loved it. I just loved seeing the narrative of it. I loved torturing Pac-Man because you can like use a slingshot to hit things to get his attention and he'll interact with the environment. But you can also hit him with the slingshot and piss him off and like get him to do things like to jump or to run. It sort of feels like it's based on the 80s/90s cartoon that was out a while back. Like there's some connections to that because he's got the Pac family and his pets. But like apparently in Japan, it wasn't called Pac-Man 2, The New Adventures. It wasn't a sequel to anything. But in America, because we had Pac-Man, the arcade game, I think Bandai Namco, just Namco at the time, was like, well, there's a Pac-Man, so this should be Pac-Man 2, right? Because that makes sense, even though they're two completely different games.
Yeah, they could get away with calling it the Pac-Man Adventure or something.
It's the most bizarre. If you've not seen this game, go to Some Call Me Johnny's channel on YouTube, because he's just a great creator, but he did a video recently about it because it was part of like a donation thing, like someone had sent it to him and he plays games that people send to him. It's funny, as me, someone who grew up with it, I have nostalgia for it. It's not a well-designed point-and-click adventure game, but I love it. But to watch this human who's in his 30s, who's never played this game before, try and figure out what the hell this thing was, because when we're kids, the games we have are the games we play, right? Like we don't have the pick of the litter as adults where we can buy whatever we want. And so that is my entry to point-and-click adventure games, and yet I still wanted to play them after that nightmare.
That's incredible.
It's amazing what you start with, particularly when you're younger, and the way it shapes what you play going forward. It's like, yeah, I look back on this, why did I continue playing video games of this genre? And then you're like, well, because I was dumb and young and I had no other basis of comparison. Also, for some of us, in our 30s and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, this was what there was. So even if it was terrible, like, people are always like, wow, I have so much to play these days. I don't know what to do. And it's like, I remember being a kid and being like, I guess I'll replay this for the fourth time because what else am I going to play at this point?
You have like one or two games per genre on the one console you have. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, I don't want to beat this one, so I'll beat this one.
And stores weren't super prevalent with games, and your rental places weren't super prevalent. So for like me, there was one local place, and he had 10 games at most at a time. So that was those 10 games. I would rent stuff so many times. Like I rented the Bill and Ted game just like so many times that he just said, just keep it. Nobody else gets this.
You've paid for it already. You've rented it like 12 times.
Exactly. So like, but it was like, that was how gaming was back then. You didn't have enough world knowledge at a younger age to realize what you were playing was shit.
I mean, and the world didn't have enough knowledge about video games to be like, oh, this is a market, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was kind of a perfect storm.
For sure.
I guess my first point-and-click adventure games, and to the idea and the point of you don't necessarily learn to love the games you have, but you learn to appreciate the things you do love about them. I grew up, my PC gaming experience as a child was gaming on a Mac. So if you want to talk about loving what you could get, you could own all of the games that was commercially released for the Mac and it still would pale. But I wish I could remember which were the first ones, because I was a huge Star Wars kid. So we had the X-Wing games, which were the CDs, so it was all the missions. And I don't know if it came with like demos of other LucasArts games. LucasArts did a whole bunch of point-and-click adventure games.
Yep.
And I played the demo to Sam and Max Hit the Road so many times. Like I could get the orders from the chief and get in the DeSoto and off I went. And finally my parents there was like a LucasArts collection that it was Dave the Tentacle, Sam and Max, The Dig, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, and I want to say something else. It wasn't Loom, but it was like kind of another off-kilter one. And it also had the demo to Full Throttle, which my dad fell in love with, so we ended up buying that separately. And Sam and Max and Full Throttle were the only ones of those that I ever finished. But I definitely put a considerable amount of time into the other ones. And that is definitely where I draw my knowledge of what point-and-click adventure games feel like. I didn't really do the Sierras. I didn't do King's Quest. And frankly, I'm glad I did, because I think that level of frustration would have sent me over the edge. But I also realized that when you mentioned Pac-Man 2, I kind of did the point-and-click thing on the NES. Because amongst the games that the few that I had Shadowgate, which was one of 3 sort of text adventure, sort of point-and-click games that MacVenture put out that got adapted to the NES. It was a little too terrifying for me as a child, but now I love it, and I've actually built a D&D game around that one. And I guess the level of super frustrating was I rented or borrowed, I never had it, but I played it so much, the Who Framed Roger Rabbit NES game.
Yeah.
Which...
Oh, I know that one.
Oh, yeah, that one's got I only literally just now talking about it realized that's got point and click to it. It is absolutely go around, find the thing, apply item to problem. Does solve? No. Apply new item. Solve? Yes. Go on. And as a child, because I never had the game, I never owned it. I never had the instruction manual. I never knew how to solve the jokes that the weasels would ask you if they captured Roger. If the answer came up and it wasn't right, well, I guess I lose a life because I couldn't scroll through them or anything like that. Nowadays, I can look these things up, but I also don't want to go back to that game.
Exactly. That's the thing. That exact game, I don't know, it was earlier, I want to say earlier this year, but it could have been 5 years ago. Again, time's meaningless now. But I woke up randomly in the middle of the night, somewhat recently, I want to say, and I was just like, there was a Who Framed Roger Rabbit game where you had to run around and put napkins on a table or take them off a table. I don't remember the logistics of what I was doing, but that existed.
That lives in your brain forever.
I just woke up in the middle of the night, almost in a sweat, remembering this random game, and I'm like, to be fair, I woke up in the middle of the night randomly remembering a DuckTales game as well, so this is hardly a rare event for me, but still, there are just games from pre-10 years old for me that I just remember very suddenly that I have had just not thought of in 20 plus years, And it's Roger Rabbit and that kind of stuff. It just pops in every now and again. I'm like, what the hell was video game?
Oh god, yeah. No, I have been having a lot of fun. I'm an avid retro game collector.
Mm-hmm. I wish I was.
And there's almost tiers of games. There's definitely games where you're like, no, this is not I need a greatest hits sort of game for my collection. This is not that. This is I remember this game. And if it's below a certain price, Even if I never play it again, it's worth having it in my collection. This is why I own Fester's Quest on the NES again, because the price was right and I grew up with it. For whatever reason, Roger Rabbit is always like $15 or something. I'm like, that is a $5 game. If it is $5 or less, I will buy it from someone for that much. It's not worth it otherwise, because all of the aforementioned.
15's a lot.
Right?
Especially for a game you're not going to play. What about you, Josh? What's the earliest point-and-click adventure game you remember?
So I've been trying to think about this while you guys have been talking, because I'm not exactly sure. The earliest, because I played a lot. I played LucasArts stuff. I played Sierra stuff. I played the Putt games. I played so much different, various different things. I want to say the earliest would be either Day of the Tentacle or Sam and Max Hit the Road. It's got to be one of those two. I think Day of the Tentacle came first for me, and then I had too much difficulty with it, and my dad used to love buying strategy guides for me, and that was back before you could just go to a store, buy strategy guides. You had to find the specific place online, and sometimes they were a bootleg one kind of thing.
Those were incredible.
Yeah, so I wanted the strategy guide for Day of the Tentacle, and for those who don't know, the original game, Maniac Mansion, was inside of Day of the Tentacle, so I wanted it for both, because Day of the Tentacle was... for, I don't know, it would have been I would have been somewhere between 7 and 10 years old. I don't remember exactly, but it was difficult, quote unquote. Maniac Mansion was impossible. There was so much going on, and I was a very dumb kid. I love the point and click adventure genre. I, to this day, not sure I've actually beaten one without looking stuff up.
Yeah, me neither.
I think at least a good 20% of every one of these games I've had to just be like, all right, I give up. I don't know. I have to put the banana with the, I don't know, whatever kind of thing.
There's an amazing article out there that's like what killed adventure games, that detailed one of the more esoteric puzzles out there and just went, point and click adventure games killed point and click adventure games.
Well, they got so up their ass. I interviewed Al Lowe once, the creator of Leisure Suit Larry, and he talked about the fact that he was always disappointed at the end of the genre, but he's like, yeah, also it was not made for longevity. It's why all the new versions of games have dialed it back, because there was too much going on, but getting back to it, Sam and Max, Day of the Tentacle, those just enthralled me. I loved the I would call it irreverent humor, but it's borderline sociopathic humor of the games. I loved those experiences, and I loved just the bright colors and the characters, and there was nothing else really like. I mean, we know we had Mario stuff, and Mario even did his quasi point and click adventure. Well, technically Luigi did with the PC release of Mario is Missing, which is why I think I love Luigi's, because of that game. But there was a lot of different stuff. But Sam and Max and Day of the Tentacle were just their own thing and their own unique sense of humor. And then of course it was Lucasfilm, it was LucasArts, so there was little nods to Star Wars here and there. And I was a Star Wars kid, so that just pulled me in. I think what made me love point-and-click adventure games, though, was a couple of years later discovering the Leisure Suit Larry series at a far too young age. To this day, I remember at about 11, 12 years old going into Virgin Megastore. It had just been built in New York City. It was literally at either the first or second weekend it was open, and my dad took me there, and there was the Leisure Suit Larry 6-game collection, and then they were doing a special where you could also buy it with the recently released Love for Sale, the 7th game. And for some reason, my dad, in his terrible judgment, bought me this. And what I remember the most about it is it was a collection plus a 7th game at a Virgin Megastore, so it was like $100+ It wasn't a deal.
Yeah.
It was not like it was
They said it was.
Yeah, it was not like it was some good price that my dad got on this video game that, sure, it might be a little too mature for a child. It was just like, nope, this is a bad decision, and I'm giving it
I would argue that 11, 12 years old, you were the intended audience of Leisure Suit Larry.
Intended audience, yes, but the fact of the matter was I couldn't answer any of the questions to load up the damn games.
Oh, that's
literally
right.
had to you had to answer trivia on the 1950s through mid 1980s, pretty much,
to prove you were old enough.
And
boot of the game. That's right.
I think I literally started studying history more so at that point in my life because of that game. And actually, it awakened a desire to learn history because I don't know this shit.
And they say we learn nothing from video games.
You learn survival skills.
That's really funny. Yeah, I think what's really interesting about the point-and-click adventure game as a genre is I think when I got into it, again, when I played Pac-Man 2, I didn't know it was a point-and-click adventure game. I didn't know what that meant. But now that you mention it, I absolutely played the King's Quest games. I remember I watched a video maybe last year sometime, of a supercut of all the ways you can die in the King's Quest games, because there's just like there's death around every corner, especially in the early Sierra games.
Oh yeah.
But what I really loved about these games is that they instilled in me a love of storytelling. You know, I got into some of the classic point and click adventure games much later because I didn't have a gaming PC until City of Heroes was a thing, which tells you how old I am, and we'll leave it at that. But like games like Day of the Tentacle and Full Throttle and the Monkey Island games, I played them much later. But like even last year when it came out for free on PS Plus, they released the remaster of Grim Fandango. I played that for the first time and fell absolutely in love with that game. And the reason I did is not so much because of the point and click adventure of it, but because of the voice acting, the storytelling, the characters. And I think like my love of games like Mass Effect and other RPGs are definitely born of the storytelling in point and click adventure games because they can tell a story unlike any other game.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, that point and click adventure game breeding an interest in RPGs is literally the same path essentially I went on. I mean, I started on them point and click adventure games a bit younger, but like for me it was just this the storytelling and the way they did it in the unique ways is what led me same to discovering different RPGs and different storytelling mechanisms. With Grim Fandango, the funny thing is that is at the time was considered the death of point and click adventure games because it was a point and click adventure game without pointing and clicking.
Yes.
Essentially, they did a completely different thing. I mean, the original version had tank controls is what they called it, and it was a beast to play that game.
Yeah.
But I was obsessed with that game. Other than maybe a couple years, I've played that on or around my birthday every year since it originally released because that game was just so special to me. And I forgot my second thought, so.
That's fine. And honestly, like, if you were to pick one old school point and click adventure game to get into or a gateway, you could do a lot worse than Grim Fandango. Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic story. Fantastic. Just everything.
Yeah, I think it's also the larger than life characters. You know, like we talked about Sam and Max before. Like, Sam and Max are just such great, ridiculous characters that are bigger than even the games they're in. Like I've of course played both Poker Night at the Inventory games on the Steam, and each of them are a character in each game at the table, and like just the stuff they say and the voice actors and the delivery. The early LucasArts games, of course, didn't have a ton of voice acting. They had some. But games like Sam and Max, for sure, they created these characters. They weren't just like a fill-in for the player. They were these fully developed, ridiculous, cartoony characters that drew you in.
Absolutely. I would also argue, I mean, we talked a little bit about sort of the sociopathic humor of the point and click adventure game. And I feel like that is a little bit of a coping mechanism because the older games with their absolutely ridiculous, esoteric, one correct solution to get through a problem thing, you basically run into frustration points of, I hate this, I hate them, this is terrible. So you need horrible things to happen every now and again.
Yeah, you need that off-the-walls humor. You need those, like, bursts of literally the characters expressing violence and anger about an experience. Like, you need that kind of stuff because otherwise you lose your mind with some of the BS that they make you get up to.
Right, and something great that Grim Fandango had, because at that point, either evolution of technology or writing or whatever else, Manny has so many different reactions to so many different things, Manny being the main character of the game. Older titles, they only had so many things that they would say, so many things that they would do, but that feeling of discovery, where even if you didn't necessarily find a solution, but you got a very unique reaction. I first noticed those sorts of things when I played Curse of Monkey Island, the third title, the first one with voice acting, with my friend Mike, because he had it and loved it, and we'd bring it over and would never finish it, but we loved it. I remember Sam and Max Hit the Road, the fact that there is a sequence of breaking Sam where if you use the pickup command on things he can't lift, there is, if you just keep clicking, he'll insist, and then he just gives up and starts crying. And Max is like, now you've done it. You've broken Sam's spirit with your stupid attempts to pick up that silly object. The thing is, if you put on the subtitles or closed captioning, like, it's not subtitles on the bottom, like it would actually be color-coded to characters and appear over them, so I always had it on. Max, instead of saying that silly object, it actually would say, your stupid attempts to pick up object number, and it would be whatever the object was within the game's code. And the search for object number 1 sort of consumed me for a while, and I haven't found it yet. And I'm not sure if it truly is like a sequential number or if there is no object 1. But sometimes I've gotten close and I forgot, I think I once found object 14 and lost my mind. So again, when you only have a few games, when you can only get so many different reactions, you make your own puzzles.
Yeah, I mean, you create your own experiences and your own, you literally create your own story arcs essentially like that because you're searching out for your own things. And particularly with point-and-click adventure games, I always found that an interesting aspect. But one thing I was thinking about, you were talking about how a lot of earlier point-and-click adventure games, you could just keep doing the same stuff over and over again, and it really was just like, okay, what do I do to solve this? But and you mentioned the Sam & Max thing with where the characters actually break. There's like almost like it's a separate genre for most people, but the full motion video games, particularly prevalent in 97th Guest, 11th Hour, stuff like that. I always have kind of considered like loosely point and click adventure game because you are pointing and clicking and it's a storytelling thing. And there are those weird esoteric puzzles and stuff like that. But there's one in particular that has been a conversation piece for my family, for my dad, my cousin, and a few other people for decades now at this point, is Star Trek Borg. And it has this thing where it's not a good game, but my brain is determined that it is a good game because it was the first of its kind FMV kind of game for Star Trek. And it was clearly ahead of its time. To my best of my knowledge, I think it bombed completely out of I think we may own the only copy. Like it did not do well, kind of thing. But in that game, if you fail enough doing so, because you could die in that, there's a lot of different alternate like directions you can go. But if you fail enough times, literally the actors will get pissed off and walk off the set.
Oh, that's
awesome.
Good.
They will get mad at you and just be like, I don't remember the exact word, but that's essentially, we're done with you. You cannot possibly do this. Like the lights are turning off, they walk away, and that's it. And that's a quote unquote death in the game. And ever since I experiencing that the first time by accident, that just became the more games do this kind of moment for me.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, because you are those characters, but you're not those characters in point and click. You're the floating hand.
Yep.
And yeah, we are kind of forgetting that subsection of PC games. We're definitely thinking of the more either comedic or epic. But Myst, Riven, like that whole series, those are point and click adventure games.
Yep.
My father, like I said, he liked Full Throttle, so he ended up getting it, and I fell in love with it as well. But he loved the Myst games, and we had a bunch of those more serious, almost, they felt less like these wacky apply object to problem games and more like, what is the solution for the next thing? They felt more like puzzle games. Myst definitely feels like that. The two that he had that I remember off the top of my head is one called Connections, which is, if you look at the cover, it is, I'm surprised it hasn't been co-opted by Vaporware yet. It's got the checkerboard thing and just weird clip art things. And like the guy who I guess wrote the game, who just sort of looks like how Victor Garber looks now, like with the hand on chin thought thing. It's like Connections, and the subtitle is ... It's a mind game.
Oh God.
There was that definitely had full motion acting. A game called Qin, Qin, that was like set in, it was a whole, I think it was time travel almost, like ancient China thing. I didn't see a ton of it, so it might be set in like the early 20th century. Like I looked it up a little bit recently when we were getting ready to talk about this. And one that definitely is time travel stuff that I only ever saw one scene of it, of my dad playing it. And it gears you into playing poker in the Old West and like watch the same grainy 140 by 140 pixel full motion video, because that was the time of the guy being like, let me tell you, that guy there just about cleaned me out. All I got is the keys to that shiny automobile outside. Reckon for a game? Like, it's the, there's a bunch of those. Like, yeah, full motion video. Those are like super highlights of just, oh, we were all trying our best. Everyone was trying their best.
They were of a time. I mean, there are two full motion video games that I remember. One that's infamous, which is Night Trap, of course, which recently got a remaster on Switch, I believe, and a few other platforms. But But the one that always sticks in my brain, even though I could never get past like the first area, was Sewer Shark on the Sega CD. Sewer Shark was just the worst game ever made. But like everyone I knew who had a Sega CD had 2 games, Sonic CD and Sewer Shark, because those were the 2 games that came out. And Sewer Shark was just a bad game. Like, it just is a terrible game, but I remember it very well because it's what we had, and we played it over and over again, even though we couldn't get past the first area.
Yeah. And I mean, good on them for attempting to make a full motion game that wasn't essentially a point and click game, because those are the successors to Dragon's Lair and Brain Dead 13, which aren't necessarily click on the object, but definitely has the one solution here.
Yeah.
Move to the left or else. And you learn and you move on. And Josh, as you mentioned, like these games weren't made for longevity, because once you knew the solutions, really the thing that kept you coming back was it entertaining to see the solutions play out, which is why I think we remember fondly the LucasArts ones and games like it. I mean, playing Full Throttle and listening to a toy piano version of Ride of the Valkyries as you release a box of battery-operated bunnies onto a minefield and watching them all explode so you could get into someone's base. You don't even have to see that. Like, that's amazing. I'm happy talking about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about earlier how point-and-click adventure games like were big on PC, and then they kind of went away, and then there were some console versions, but the heyday of point-and-click adventure is on PC. And what I think is really fascinating about the Wii and that era of gaming, the Wii and the Wii U, is there was a push to bring point-and-click adventure games to the Wii because you had a console on screen with the Wiimote. And the games I played too much of on the Wii, which were WiiWare games, were all the Strong Bad games. There were a ton of Homestar Runner Strong Bad point-and-click adventures on the Wii. I think I had the first 2. And like, I just, again, it goes back to the characters. Like, I love the Homestar Runner characters. And for them to be in a point-and-click adventure game where you can click on stuff. And like, I remember Strong Mad is in the background of one of the scenes. You could just click on him and he just gets angrier and angrier. Or like Strong Sad's there and you could click on him and just be like, oh, I guess you clicked on me. That's fine, I guess. Like just experiencing these characters through nonsense. And I really dug that. And I don't think it really took off. I feel like the Wii was in the right direction for point and click console games. But what I love about it is it was an honest attempt and it worked well, but obviously those games are better on PC because you have more control with the mouse. And anyone who's tried to use the Wiimote pointed directly at the TV for more than a half hour, it's like your wrist, your arm, your whole body hurts after a while because it's just not precise.
It's true. No, and it speaks to the fact that point and click adventure games as a concept aren't inherently flawed or inherently bad. They're in fact kind of wonderful, but we are now into an era, I suppose, if you want to call it that, where in game design and what games are capable of, you have these sort of meta reactions within games that aren't point-and-click adventure games. You know, you can get the actors walking off because you failed a solution in a JRPG, in a cover shooter. And that idea of exploring the reactions, the consequences, has infused itself into a lot of other genres. And I think visual novels have kind of picked up a little bit of the slack, almost a little too rigidly. And I think, yeah, we are in a time when you can bring back the strange puzzles and ideas of a point-and-click adventure game, but also allowing for multiple approaches to a problem, or at least amusing failures along the way. Unfortunately, off the top of my head, I'm blanking on if there are any recent of the last 3 or 4 years point-and-click games. My brain goes to the old Telltale series games,
right,
but not quite. Like, I'm trying to figure.
Telltale is the successor, essentially. Telltale was more or less the successor to the point-and-click adventure game. Certainly with the Sam & Max games they did and some other stuff. They did that, and then they kind of branched away from that when they embraced Walking Dead and that kind of thing, which it's still technically a point-and-click adventure game, but it's really, they're Telltale games is what they actually boil down to. They're their own narrative thing. But recently there was Thimbleweed Park,
yes,
which actually I have the mouse pad for, which Thimbleweed Park was from, I want to say from Ron Gilbert, you know, one of the parents of the entire genre. And that game is brilliant. It's also they brought new aspects of point-and-click adventure games forward to make them more playable by a modern audience, while there's still a lot of just total bullshit in the game that is very much in that point-and-click adventure thing that's like, you might not have modernized it quite enough, but but it was a brilliant game that I would love to see more of. I think there's been at least one or two other very clearly point-and-click adventure games, but I guess those would be like the newer Leisure Suit Larry games they've made.
Yeah.
But there's definitely something else I can't remember right now.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of them are in the indie space. But yeah, talking about Telltale, like, I mean, those Strong Bad games were Telltale games. And they also made Game of Thrones game. They made Guardians of the Galaxy games. You know, there was another one based on a comic book that I can't remember, Fables. It was The Wolf Among Us.
Like, The Wolf Among Us.
All of them narrative-driven, spiritual successors to point-and-click adventures, and that's what got me back into them more recently. I have the full run, though I haven't played them all, but I have the full run of the Batman point-and-click adventure games, and I know a lot of people who swear by those games over the Arkham games, saying that they're more like Batman games because you're doing the detective work mostly.
They are.
You're not doing a lot of the combat, because the combat stuff in Batman is cool because it's a power fantasy in the Arkham games, but the reality is the stuff that makes Batman is the detective stuff. And I've only played a little bit of them, but what I've seen, they're really well made. And I think that's an interesting idea that I never made a connection to until much later, but comic books seem like a perfect fit for point and click adventure, right? Like to do the Guardians of the Galaxy games also that were point and click Telltale games. Those are narrative pieces. Like the action in comic books are great, but like it's about the storytelling. It's a visual book essentially. And so like, you know, graphic novel, aha. I think it translates really well.
All I wanted as a kid was the 90s animated X-Men and the 90s animated Spider-Man to be a point-and-click adventure game. That's literally all I wanted. They ended up releasing a Spider-Man cartoon maker, which I have somewhere in this pile, but I'm not going to make more noise pulling out the disc of it, where you could essentially, you make your own adventures. It was fun, but terrible, kind of, you know, because it was a cartoon maker made in the, you know, early to mid-90s. But all I ever wanted was those games, and even now, I would love a Spider-Man or an X-Men point-and-click adventure game, like seeing Guardians get their own thing through Telltale and seeing Batman get his own thing. And then even Wolf Among Us, that is a comic book as well. So like, give me more of these comic book properties, but you know, Telltale being the mismanaged company that it was,
not gonna happen now.
Never came to. Also, not all of them succeeded, so.
No. I heard notoriously that the Game of Thrones one was pretty awful. I'm not a Game of Thrones fan, so I couldn't say. But
it was not fun.
I mean, I think that I don't know if there are other genres that have the high bar of pass fail for point and click adventure. I think there's so much more scrutiny for point and click adventure because it's not a game that you can kind of fumble your way through most of the time. Like we all said, none of us have beaten a point and click adventure game without some kind of guide because of the inherent difficulty in it. But I feel like while an RPG or an action game or any of those things you can put on easy and just kind of enjoy the narrative and make your way through, the point of a point and click adventure game is to discover and think about and explore. And I think that makes it harder to not necessarily dumb it down, but like make it more streamlined. I'm sure the putt-putt games are probably simpler than the other point and click adventure games, but they're not easy even for those kinds of games.
I had to look up a guide for putt-putt. The first putt-putt game, like when I was a little kid, because I was dumb. So like, I think nowadays, like I still have to look up guides for Leisure Larry and stuff like that to remind me if I replay them. But putt-putt, like I can do now, but as a kid, like I was like, and I think the solutions were not exactly subtle.
Yeah, I would argue Curse of Monkey Island has sort of, they don't have easy mode, but they have hard mode. There is Curse of Monkey Island, one could argue, was a bit of a dumbing down after the first two games, but it still was enough of a challenge. Mike and I made our way mostly through it. We were able to finally beat it. Maybe we looked up a couple of solutions, but then you could do Mega Puzzle, which is the same story, but in order to get certain solutions, you had to talk to other people. You had to do other things. It was a more intricate process to get through everything. And maybe there's something like that to be had. Or there might be a certain amount of like setting puzzle flag. Do I have to make this item that I need to get to this person, or can I acquire it?
Well, and also I feel like some of the Telltale games had some streamlining that made them easier than older point and click adventure games. You know, they had some quick time events and some other stuff. It was kind of this bridge between a visual novel and a point and click adventure. But something I wanted to see more of, and we didn't really get which Telltale was trying to do before they went under, is like they did Tales from the Borderlands, which was a prequel game based in the Borderlands universe that was a Telltale game. It was a point-and-click adventure visual novel. And like, I would love for franchises to do spin-offs in other genres, and not a lot of games do that anymore. Like, imagine if we could get a Mass Effect game that was just a visual novel point-and-click adventure where you're not playing as Shepard or even any of the lead characters or main party members. You're playing as like, you know, Captain Anderson, and you're discovering a plot on the Citadel and have to do detective work. I think that would be really cool. And it's just not common, it feels like. I do appreciate when worlds spin off into other genres. The idea that the Messenger's follow-up game is going to be an RPG in the same universe by the same developers. It seems like a more indie thing to take those kind of hard turns into other genres. I just don't feel like mainstream titles want to do that. And look, I'm as excited as of when we're recording this, though it'll be months later by the time you hear it. The new Mass Effect finger quotes trailer came out, and I cried like every other nerd because I was so excited. There is something a little disheartening of this idea of something following the trilogy. What if they canonize an ending? What if we Shepard again? And doing spin-offs into other genres, I feel like gives you more freedom to leave those characters behind. And I don't feel like enough. Like Zelda doing a prequel game, Age of Calamity, based on the Dynasty Warriors franchise, like hack and slash, but telling a sort of canon story of what happened before the Calamity is huge. Not a lot of games do that and genre hop like that. And so I feel like point-and-click adventure would be a really easy gateway to open to doing those kinds of different things.
I wholeheartedly agree. Like, it's definitely, I think, in the grand scheme as a genre is one of the easiest way to kind of branch out. I think what happens with a lot of studios is they try something new, and either their fan base is just militant about, no, it's this way, and doesn't do stuff, or when they make the game, the new target audience doesn't jump into it. I think about like Halo in that regard with making an RTS.
Right.
Well, I think that did well enough. I very much doubt that did as well as they would have hoped. Conversely, you have Nintendo, who's well known. You know, you already mentioned Age of Calamity and Hyrule Warriors, but they're known for being really protective, and they let Ubisoft make a tactical RPG, mixing Mario with Rabbids kind of thing, which, you know, it's taking existing characters. And I feel like now that Nintendo is starting to allow their properties to do some crazy crap in alternate genres than we're used to, I feel like other studios might soften up their approach a little bit and maybe take a few more risks. But it's definitely an indie space thing, and when it comes to our major known properties, it's indies being able to afford the licensing. Hence what happened with Telltale. They bought licenses like it was going out of style, and due to various other things, they went out of style because of a bunch of choices. So we end up with that.
The interesting thing also with where indie gaming is and accessibility and digital distribution is we are getting wonderful titles that don't feel the need to justify a super long experience and are exactly what they need to be. And we are all gamers that are very into our adult years and appreciate that, as well as the fact that that means if someone makes a point-and-click adventure game, maybe it's only an hour, maybe it's half an hour, maybe it's 3 hours. It doesn't overstay its welcome. And now that a lot of other titles and a lot of other studios, big and small, are incorporating various genres and various alternate experiences within a larger gameplay experience, talking about point-and-click adventure games makes me remember how much I absolutely love escape rooms, which is meat space point-and-click adventure games. Try every stupid idea you can think of, you might find the solution. I'm either really good or really bad at escape rooms for that reason. I will look under everything. It's great. And you can take that escape room mentality. It's like, do you want a game that is hundreds of escape rooms? That's exhausting, unless you make it arcade style. But if part of a Batman game, if part of some noir adventure game, you have the crime scene, case the joint, whatever it is, point and click style with comments on things, and you look at stuff and you can turn things around in your hand, a la looking at items in Resident Evil 1 to find the medals within the books. I feel like there is still a great place for point and click adventure ideals and play experiences. And even if we don't necessarily get full on point and click adventure games, I think we can still have great point and click adventure experiences, either as small parts of a larger game or small bite-sized wonderful titles that are coming out in the indie space.
Yeah. I think the strongest thing about Telltale's, even though it didn't work out for them, obviously, at this point, the idea of doing episodic games, I think, was brilliant because it allows you to go through the game. There's a clear stopping point, and you know you'll get more, but that way they can release them, in theory, more quickly over time in pieces, and you can also experience them more quickly over time in pieces. I think any game that I play now that lets me save whenever I want is my favorite game, because games with save points, like I love classics like Final Fantasy VII and Super Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger, all of my favorite games. But the problem with playing the classic versions is that there are hard save points. And if you don't get to them, like on the Switch, you can suspend them. But on the old Super Nintendo or whatever, the solution would be like, well, I got to go to bed. I guess I'll leave the system on all night, turn off the TV and pray. And usually it was fine. And the idea of making a point-and-click adventure game where you can save frequently, or it's episodic, or it's piecemeal, is really attractive to me. And I'm curious how the new Sam & Max that we're going to get sometime next year, I think, is going to work. And if it'll have an autosave feature, if it'll be short and bite-sized, because they're re-releasing the older ones, right?
Oh, well, I mean, that released last week.
It did come out already.
Yeah,
okay.
Save the World came out last week. It's the remaster of that. If you look on their website, they have the second and third season of the Telltale games listed on the website, shadowed out. So it's very clear that they're going with the mentality of, they're kind of teasing you, hey, if this does well, we'll remaster, the other two. I actually have the original third season on my desk.
Oh, nice.
Because I love it. Yeah, no, it's out. I've played 2 or 3 episodes of it, and it looks brilliant. I think I love what they've done with it. I think they've added a few new things here and there as well, but my one issue with it is, in hindsight, like, the original one was actually that good. I think the second and third season were far superior. The first one was just very... Telltale was a small company. They didn't have a budget. They reuse characters all the damn time throughout the whole thing. It's okay.
And we were just all excited to have Sam and Max again.
Exactly. I was excited, I've hit the road here on my desk.
Yeah.
I was obsessed with Hit the Road to the extent that I play. I don't know if this disc even would still work if I had a CD drive.
I feel that way. I have a copy of Neverhood that I'm like, will that work?
Exactly. Well, I had a copy of technically somewhere between FMV and a point-and-click adventure game, Page Master, which is based on the movie, and that disc never worked again. I overplayed that game to death, but. Now we were all excited. Oh my God, we're getting more Sam & Max, because that was a game that there was an announced sequel to for years. I remember reading in a PC Gamer and in Game Informer, hey, it might be coming out soon. Hey, it might be coming out soon, kind of thing. And nothing came of it. And then it was like, nope, it went under. Dave Purcell's moving on to other things, yada, yada, yada. And then Telltale announced this company who made a series called Bone, I think is all they had at this point. They're making, Telltale's Sam & Max Save the World. And everyone was like, what? what is this? And and it's episodic, and that was a brand new concept, pretty much for the most part. And they released the first episode, and I was like, it's more Sam & Max, yay! And then by the time the first season ended, I was like, I don't know if that was actually good or not. I'm just happy it was Sam & Max. And in hindsight, I'm like, it was good. It wasn't amazing. The second and third season had far better storytelling. The third season had amazing storytelling, and genuinely made me cry a couple of times from what I remember. But amazing storytelling and far better things. But the first season was, and even still is in the remaster, is a proof of concept game more than anything. And I very much hope it sells well, because I want Skunk Ape, which my brain insists on calling Skunkape. I have no idea why, but I'm pretty sure this is just Skunk Ape. I really hope that this does well enough that they can remaster the other Sam & Max games, and the dream, they have the license, make a 4th season of it.
Right. Yeah. Get remaster all the other ones and then make a new one.
That's my dream, because
the
third season ends on a cliffhanger, and that was a decade ago. So
yeah, I mean, I think with how game development works now, and with a lot of more indie studios popping up, or old developers or old creators getting the rights to their previous properties and trying to remaster them, I think that dream is more of a reality now than it was before, but we'll have to see.
The other interesting landscape that I realized that could also pick up point-and-click adventure games is VR.
Yeah.
That's another one. I was just looking up the Sam & Max Save the World, and I saw one this time it's virtual, and I was like, oh yeah, that's another one where you're like, everywhere, find the thing, do the thing. And that's a little less indie studio, but I don't know.
I mean, I feel like VR gets more and more accessible with every year, even though it's a thing that I'm still not that into.
Once everyone can afford the apparatus involved, then I think it becomes more accessible.
Yeah.
Which you got to keep
agree.
iterating on it and keep changing stuff for it to actually get affordable. It's getting closer and closer. I say as I look at my $800 plus Vive that just sits on the floor over next to my desk that I've used maybe 5 hours worth of time because I was going to be a VR content creator.
Yeah. I keep almost getting the PSVR.
Same.
I think maybe once I can get my hands on a PS5 and then also they released the headset for the PS5, I think I would consider that because I feel like at that point, if they find a way to just plug in and use it, which is what they're working towards, I know. And I think the PSVR more or less is like that. You can just kind of plug in.
It's pretty much plug and play.
That makes it more attractive to me because the idea of setting up shit around my room and like I just, and I finally have a space that I could do VR in, whereas previously in New York I did not.
Yeah, my Vive had gotten unhooked for a charity stream we did back in 2017 to set it up in my family room, and then it just never got reset up in my office, and literally it was finally a Star Wars Squadrons, which is what convinced me to set it up, and finally after a remodel I found all the pieces, and I was like, cool, I'm going to jump into Squadrons, and it was 5.5 hours later that I got it working.
Oh, jeez.
And let me be clear, the 30 minutes of Squadrons I played after that was worth it for that amount of time, but it's not plug and play. It's not easy. I don't even have the technical know-how. I just dumb lucked my way into getting it actually working. So until VR is more of a point and click accessible kind of thing, why would they make stuff in this? But circling back, you have a point. VR has the potential of the FMV style point and click adventure games being a viable thing. I just had a fantasy of a VR Seventh Guest kind of experience.
VR Starship Titanic.
Oh my god.
Ooh, that'd be awesome. I think that we've seen such a diverse engagement with, like we said at the very beginning of the episode, there was a rise, there was a fall, there was a rise again, and then it seemed like there was a lull again after the Wii generation and like the Telltale going under, and whatever the future is of the few franchises that are trying to be saved from Telltale to get their final development, which is still kind of a giant question mark. I am curious to see in the indie space with stuff like Thimbleweed Park to see where point-and-click adventure games go and how we get new ones in the future. And I think VR is actually a really great space for that. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there are plenty of point-and-click adventure games we haven't even mentioned that folks love. Like, it was such a massive genre, especially in the 90s and 2000s, that like, especially on PC, that there are tons of ones that I'm still hearing about that I've never even played before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I've never played any of the sci-fi ones, and there were tons of them. So many.
Oh, yeah. So many.
I mean, just from Sierra, Space Quest, King's Quest, they were obsessed with Blank Quest was, Police Quest, stuff like that. But
they had a brand.
There's a sizable amount of stuff, yeah, I've never played either. And we barely even touched on the stuff I did play because there was just so much and there's such a climate to these that it's always fascinating to think about. A point-and-click adventure game was essentially the king of PC gaming for the better part of the late 80s, well into the 90s. People always think about, the first-person shooter primarily is the king of PC gaming for most of its thing, but point-and-click adventure was what first-person shooter defeated, essentially, to take over that space. And it's because first-person shooter was a joke in general. Like, that wasn't a viable thing until finally it was figured out, and suddenly that became how you tested your PC, but point and clicks were just like, that was storytelling. It was something that wasn't viable on a console, so it could only exist on PC. And now I sit here and I think to myself, I like point and click adventure games on PC, but I would really rather play them on a Switch.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Being able to play a point and click adventure game on the Switch or on the phone.
Something handheld.
Yeah, I think would be a really great way to, because then you could just tap all over the place. Like, it just seems to be like the next level. And I have to imagine eventually we will get there. And there might even be stuff out in the indie space like that. I haven't done that much searching.
I have a very silly question to kind of wrap things up.
Sure.
Just on as talking about these things. What was your favorite point and click interface? Because there was a lot of different ways that we were able to interact with the stuff around us, either the commands. I think of the full throttle interface where you had a crosshair. If it was an interactable object, a red box would go around it. You'd click on it, and you would get basically the crest of the Polecats, your motorcycle gang. And it had a skull, a fist, and a boot. And You go to the eyes of the skull, eyes would pop out. Look at the thing. You put to the mouth, it'd like suck out a serpent's tongue. Either talk to or put your mouth on whatever it is. And hand and foot are interacting with your hands or your feet, whether it's kicking a dumpster, picking something up, punching somebody, whatever it is. It was straightforward, and I never felt like there were secret commands that I didn't know about.
I don't know if I have a specific interface. I mean, honestly, I think just for nostalgia and how dumb it was, the slingshot make Pac-Man do stuff in Pac-Man 2, like, it was just, you could shoot power pellets and turn him into Super Pac-Man, and he would attack the ghosts, and like, you would either shoot at things to get his attention, drop things on him. I think it was really versatile for a Genesis game to have this one thing, the slingshot that shot pellets, to do all these different things. And I have fond memories of it, even though it is a horrible trash fire of a game. I just really like how I was able to interact with Pac-Man in that way. And I can still hear the sound effects in my head because Pac-Man was nonverbal, of like the noises he would make when you would hit him, or like when he would be happy or sad. So I think that's my favorite just by virtue of my memories tied to it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think of it's the Day the Tentacle Sam & Max interface, the SCUMM VM is what it's called. Like that interface just of, again, like, you know, the use object, the lick button, all the different, oh no, lick was actually a laser layer one. Anyways, I get all these mixed up, but still, but like the actual, you know, visual interface kind of thing, because you know, you have Maniac Mansion where it's all like just word prompts, and then you have the old Leisure Solaire games where there was a lot, like I think the original, you actually had to type out stuff, which when I was a kid, I definitely preferred the more the icons because it was simpler, it was easier for my brain to grasp. As an adult, I kind of actually do like the typing stuff out because, yeah, you could end up sitting and try to type things 875,000 times and not get it right. But when you found a random thing that was really funny, it was really funny, you know, kind of things. The dumb humor.
They could hide context.
Exactly. You could hide context, and then, yeah, you could pull on that object, but there was a specific like variant of it that actually it accomplished the goal, but the dialogue was different because some, you know, game developer was sitting on the toilet one day or in the shower one day and thought it would actually be funny if one person typed this instead of this. It still works, but we're going to reward you. I like that kind of aspect of it more as an adult now when I think about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, this has been a delight. Josh, thank you again. Thank you so much for taking the time. Before we wrap up, why don't you tell folks where they can find you on the internet, the kinds of things you do, and what to check out that you're working on?
Yeah, so I mean, easiest way to find me on the internet is at Bear Punch, BearPunch, because I'm on Twitter. I don't know how to leave. I wish I could. It's a problem. Yeah. No, but that's the best way to find me. That's where I talk about stuff. Any project I'm working on. I work in the PR space for Stride PR. I forget how much I'm allowed to talk about games I work on podcasts, so I just don't. But if you want to, you know, but if you want to see stuff that I'm working on, I always shout it out on there. I'll usually retweet the companies I'm working with, or if something special is going on, I'll announce it there. If I'm doing podcast appearances or doing my own things with podcasts, which thanks pandemic for screwing up those plans, but I will talk about that always there. It's pretty much the best place to find me, but I have an idea for a Mass Effect podcast that you may be hearing more about very soon because I can't. That stupid trailer put an idea in my head, and then a wonderful human being. I'm gonna give her credit. Liana Rupert, who works for Game Informer, a mutual of ours, made a comment in a video that just literally went from "I have a Mass Effect podcast idea" to "Oh no, I have an idea now" based on one little comment she made. So you might be seeing more of that, or I'll do what I do with every podcast idea in 2020 and just be like, no. But yeah, that's Bear Punch on Twitter, best place to find me rambling somewhat coherently.
Please do follow Josh over there. He's a great follow. And yeah, if you ever start a Mass Effect podcast of any kind, you know I will come on and talk about Mass Effect endlessly. So thank you again for joining us. It was a delight. It's nice to talk about a genre of games that we don't really get to talk about a lot. And it was something that was on Geoff and I's roadmap. But when you said that you wanted to talk about it, it was like, oh yes, let's do it. Let's do it now. No time like the present, right?
I mean, thank you for reaching out to me on that tweet because, yeah, I love doing shows with you, Matt. I love being invited on to talk to you. And it was nice getting to meet you, Geoff, as well. So it's like this was something I wanted to talk about in general for a while because even on my own shows that I used to do, nobody else played point-and-click adventure games, so it was me just shouting at nothing about this genre because none of my co-hosts had played stuff. So I've been like jonesing to talk about this for like almost a decade. So yeah, so thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad this remastered Sam & Max thing existed so that I could actually have a reason to pitch this. So
awesome. Well, yes, you're welcome back anytime, and this was a delight. And I'm sure there will be a round 2 at some point, as there's plenty of stuff we did not cover.
Oh yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's more to say.
There's always more to say.
That's why it's important that you listeners let us know what you think. Did you play any point-and-click adventure games either growing up or currently? What are your favorites? What are the ones you hate? What are your favorite weird puzzle solutions to getting through something? How would you indiscriminately use Max to solve all of your problems? We want to know.
Yes. And also, of course, you can follow us all over the internet. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Follow us at funandgamespod on Twitter. We also have a Discord server. You can go to certainpov.com, where we, with many other nerdy podcasts, exist, and a permanent invite link to our Discord server, where Josh is, where we are. You can talk about this episode when it comes out, any of the other stuff that we're working on. Please hit us up. If you would like to tell Josh how good of an idea it is that he wants to start a Mass Effect podcast, come to our Discord server. Tag him there and tell him. But thank you so much for listening. Of course, also, if you could write a review on your podcast platform of choice, it helps us to get featured, bring more folks in, and expand this conversation that we have going.
If you have a particular point-and-click adventure game that you feel very passionately about and you want to talk about, check out our sister series, Side Quests, where so many different guests do just that. And you can reach out to either me or Matt about possibly talking about a game that you love as part of this podcast, because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming. Hey.
Oh, hey, Geoff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CPOV.
Certainpov.com.